We've been doing a lot of talking about the sort of poor positions of working women as they entered the workforce in the middle part of the 19th century and as that 19th century continued. I'm talking now to Professor Lara Vapnek, and Professor Vapnek has written an extraordinary book on independence among breadwinning women. It's a story that I think we need to know something about because it tells us the other side, if you like, of women's poor working conditions. So, Lara, let me start by asking you, what do you mean by independence for working women?
Basically, for women to claim independence in the late 19th century was for them to begin to identify themselves as individuals, to make a claim that they too were entitled to be recognized as adults, that they were self-supporting, that they were supporting their families, and that they were not simply dependent on men, and that they were not simply creatures of the domestic sphere.
But how could this happen? I mean, given the fact that their wages were so low that they couldn't really support themselves, or that most women couldn't really support themselves, and given the fact that many women turned over all or some large part of their wages to their families, how did they imagine themselves ever becoming independent?
It's a great question. I think for a lot of these women, independence was an aspiration rather than a reality. But it was related to the fact that by going out to work and by earning wages, they gained a new sense of themselves that they didn't have before. They started to think about themselves as family supporters, even if they were giving over most of their wages to their families. That gave them power even within their own families. They started to be recognized as more important people in their families. And even if they gave over most of their wages, they might keep some of their wages, and those wages enabled them to participate more in the leisure economy that was starting to develop in cities, to go to places like Coney Island, to save up for a new dress, to start to do things that expressed this new sort of sense of being people who were participating in the wider world.
Can you give us an example of a woman, perhaps, who actually, sort of launched herself in the workplace and then used that to become an independent voice?
One example I can think of is Jenny Collins, who started off as a mill girl in the 1840s. And in the 1850s, she moved to Boston. She began working as a vest maker. She was orphaned, that's why she had gone into the workplace to begin with. And during the Civil War, she began organizing some of the women that she worked with as vest makers to send keepsakes to Union soldiers. And after the war, these women continued to be organized in a sense. They started meeting and they established the Working Women's League, which issued a petition calling for garden homesteads. So they actually asked the state of Massachusetts to provide land for working women so that they could become independent proprietors.
So back up a little bit. The Working Women's League is established by ordinary sewing women, and they petition the Massachusetts legislature? How does that happen?
Absolutely. It's pretty extraordinary because it's working women exclusively. They actually tell upper class women who are quite interested, who would like to help them, that they are going to set the agenda. And they petitioned for garden homesteads. And of course, prior to this point, working women had joined working men in petitioning for a 10-hour day. So this was not a new avenue of activity, but they were using it in a new way. And they actually call upon the Commonwealth of Massachusetts to recognize them as wage earners and also as family supporters. So many of them had lost husbands or fathers or brothers in the Civil War, and this was a moment where people sort of had to recognize that you had all of these women that needed to support themselves. They were struggling to do it, and I think it's interesting that they turned to the state to ask for land.
I'm actually fascinated by this because, of course, the women involved in the abolitionist and the women's rights movements before the Civil War also used the petition as a way to express their voices. They didn't have the vote, so they petitioned. So now we have working class, not just working class, but actual wage-earning women using the petition, the same technique. So they must have learned something from their mothers and their sisters. But you mentioned something else that I want to follow through on, and that is that the Working Women's League didn't consist only of wage-earning women, but also included upper-class women who wanted to help them?
Well, there were these upper-class women that were organized in the New England Women's Club, and they were very interested in what the Working Women's League was doing, and they wanted to help, but actually the Working Women's League was quite adamant that the working women needed to speak for themselves, which I think is pretty extraordinary given the time period that we're in.
So are there other ways that these upper or middle class, middle income, non-working women, non-wage earning women helped? Did they participate in other ways?
You see upper class women trying to help working women sort of throughout. I mean, you can think of it as kind of an extension of women's work of benevolence prior to the Civil War, that upper class women do feel this sense of responsibility for poor women and for children. And there are different moments when upper class allies come in and help out working class women. So in Boston, those women were pretty firm about trying to stick to their own agenda and make sure that the upper class women just played a supporting role.